Every single morning, the first thing I would do is cry, just because being awake was that difficult. I felt like a ticking time bomb. It was just a matter of when, really.
So my understanding is that you've already been in therapy for some time, and I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what initially got you to try it the first time.
So initially, I was so against therapy. I didn't want nothing to do with it. Like, I thought it was a lost cause. I was like, no one can help me. Like, no one can imagine what I'm going through or even trying to tell me what I can do to get better, because in my mind, nothing could help me. 2018, I believe, I overdosed on like sleeping meds. And after that, I was kind of actually forced into it. Like, I didn't have a choice. And that kind of started my therapy journey. And from there, I was in therapy for 2 years.
So something going on in your life led to some unsafe behaviors, like ways to cope. Like people often turn to substance when there is trauma because it helps numb stuff. It helps you not think about things. And sometimes you feel good, right? It makes you feel not just better from this thing that has been painful, but it feels good. And so I'm hearing that you had kind of like a mandated route into therapy. You mentioned that you wouldn't have considered it. So what were some of your ideas about what therapy was before?
I didn't even know where to even begin, what therapy looks like. I just thought someone would just sit there and tell me, oh, how do you feel about that? Oh, how do you feel about that? You know what I mean? That's kind of like what I thought, or like someone tried to preach to me or like tell me what to do or how I should do it. But really, it wasn't like that at all for me.
It ended up being something different.
Exactly.
And I know you can't like give an entire synopsis of the therapeutic journey that you've been through, but now that you have gone through some of these sessions and it sounds like you found out it wasn't just, so how did that make you feel? And I'm sure your therapist did ask many times, well, how did that make you feel? What do you think of therapy now then? What is therapy if somebody is to ask you, a seasoned client, like what to expect if they were to try this out?
Therapy is amazing. Honestly, I recommend it to everybody. They tell me the problems, like, you know what you need? A therapist. And like, I don't even mean that in like a negative, it's not a negative thing at all. It's very positive, and I try to enlighten that. But for me, when I was in therapy, like, okay, so you have these dark thoughts, and when you don't recognize them or you don't even know what they are, it can easily spiral out of control. And so with therapy, she really helps me recognize these thinking traps, is what we would call them. And throughout the day, I was more aware. Like if I would say, I'm worthless, or you can't do that, I would be like, wait a minute, like that's not true. Like let's kind of lay it out and understand like what this is, or like where it's coming from. That's something I still practice until this day, every single day. Catch myself thinking something negative. And obviously there's more to it, but something I really took away from that.
Yeah, you're describing cognitive behavioral therapy,
That's
CBT.
exactly what it is.
Yeah, you went through this process where somebody helped you learn to identify and then articulate your internal process. Because when you can start talking about it or even understanding it a little bit better, I think that's when you really are able to make strides in terms of finding healing for yourself, the ability to let the things go that you need to, the ability to move on. So you shared a little bit about what led to your first session, right? You were forced because you became unsafe to yourself.
Exactly.
Can you share now what you think led to the types of feelings you were trying to numb with substances?
Well, I think it was just like a let up. There wasn't like a particular event. Well, something did trigger it, and I can talk about that. But just overall, like I've been struggling with it since I was a young child. And I think it was like really just like a matter of time. And I think if I like received help sooner, it wouldn't have gotten to that point. And for like a lot of people like me, unfortunately, something that drastic has to happen for us to even want to accept help.
Yeah. The rock bottom experience, right? Like people, not people, I should say we often feel like there's some kind of like shortcoming or something wrong with me if I need to reach out for support. Because a lot of us have this misconception that therapy is for the weak-minded, the people that are absent of some kind of strong will of their own. And it takes a lot of courage, I think, to finally realize like vulnerability takes a lot of strength. Being able to open up to someone, being able to open up to yourself and admit
that's
a lot
the
of
hardest
stuff.
part.
Yeah. And so you mentioned like your life led to that moment, I'm sure, series of events. And then you also said something about something did trigger this. So is that something that you're willing to kind of open up about now?
I think at that time, it was my depression really had a hold of me. Every single morning, the first thing I would do is cry, just because being awake was that difficult. I didn't even want to spend the day with myself, like, mentally. That was going on for a couple months, and I feel like no matter what I did, like one day I would wake up, I feel like I would do a good job, but I feel like it was still not enough. I'm like, wow, I really gave it my all, and it still was not enough. I was like, what is the point of being here? One day, my ex-boyfriend and I got in an argument, and I was like, wow, I'll never be enough. I'll never be worthy. And normally in those situations, I will contemplate. I'll have a conversation with myself, like, okay, Ashley, one more day, like just hold on, hold on. But that day, there was no conversation with myself. A switch just flipped, and I just went through with it. And I was like, worst case scenario, I go to sleep and I wake up like, okay, but like best case scenario for me, I go to sleep and I don't even know what happened. That's what I was hoping for, but it didn't exactly go as planned, which is probably the best. I feel like a ticking time bomb. It was just a matter of when, really.
And you're describing just like living for such a long time without knowing how to regulate your emotions and really process a lot of stuff, right? And it like blew up in an argument, sounds like. I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of ask a little bit more about your previous therapy experiences so far. So while you've been in therapy, I'm hearing you say that you've learned some skills. You've learned some things to like cope with and navigate everyday life. Like, how did you learn that stuff? Like, what is it that the therapist was doing to teach these things, right?
So I'm a huge imagery person. And like one thing we would do, it was kind of like how I describe it, like a court case. Okay. And like you have your like the jury, you have like the lawyers, stuff like that. One thing I struggled with was feeling like I'm not capable of taking care of myself. Like I'm a grown adult. I should be able to take care of myself. And I couldn't. And so we would break down the evidence. Like, okay, what's real and like what's false? Like, let's just recognize that there. Because when you're in this kind of mindset, you tell yourself so many lies, stuff that's not even true. And so I'm like, okay, well, I do this. I do my laundry sometimes. Like I have been working out past couple weeks. Like, oh, you do feed yourself. You have to give yourself credit for the things that you actually do. And we would write it down in the evidence section. And we would write down like what was false. And basically like the jury would come to the conclusion like, no, you are capable. So yeah, you would just really just have to, in that process, give yourself credit and kind of look at what was real and what wasn't. And you would shift those thoughts of, I should be able to. And you change it into, no, you are able to, and you do.
It's a lot of just shifting the way you think about stuff, taking on different perspectives, hearing someone kind of reword or like paraphrase your life in a different way. It sounds like you've learned a lot about yourself too. There's like a period of time where it sounds like you didn't really know who you were.
Mm-hmm.
Like what parts of learning these skills, learning how to identify evidence for and against some kind of thought or belief helped you figure out who you are? Like, do you feel like there was some kind of self-exploration, self-identification type of process? Like, it's not just learning skills, right? It's, I guess I'm trying to get to your sense of any kind of change in the ways that you perceive yourself. Like, how has that kind of shifted in that 2-year period?
So a lot of people, I believe, feel like they go to therapy and overnight they're so much better. And that's just not the case. And for me, again, like until this day, it's something I had to practice every single day. So there wasn't like one particular moment where I just like saw myself in like a better light. Eventually you keep practicing and practicing and practicing. And eventually you start to learn yourself. You start to value yourself and you see yourself in a whole different light. You learn boundaries and you have them now and you have rules for yourself and you don't allow certain people or certain situations control you as much because you have more confidence in the tools and the coping mechanisms that you have developed throughout therapy. And that's definitely helped me a lot. And like to this day, I really do see myself in a higher light. And I don't let people take advantage of me as much as I used to back in the day.
If you want even more videos just like this one, make sure you subscribe and click on the boxes over here. I'm also excited to let you know that you can now get my book, Think Like a Monk, from thinklikeamonkbook.com. Check below in the description to make sure you order today.